Hi, everyone, and welcome to a new edition of Newsmakers. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Friday, March 7th. Don't forget to turn those clocks ahead before you go to bed tomorrow. Spring ahead, fall back. Very easy to remember. And we are joined, as always, by our all-star panel of top local journalists, Josh Molina, man of mystery and many hats, and host of the Santa Barbara Talks podcast, Ryan P. Cruz, staff writer for The Independent, and newly anointed staff writer for The Independent, Margaux Lovely. Margaux, congratulations, I guess. Uh,
Thank you.
it's a full-time job, but it's with The Independent. So, you got good news and bad news. All right, be that as it may, thank you for coming. So, we were talking to Mayor Lodge last week and didn't have a chance to discuss what did or didn't happen at the Board of Supervisors the week before about the Sable offshore pipeline, the Refugio pipeline reopening. It was a fairly narrow issue that was before the supervisors. Nonetheless, it drew zillion people to come testify and ended up in a 2-2 vote. Margaux, I felt like I was watching some soccer match or something. What does the vote mean, and what's next?
Well, we're under the impression at the moment that the 2-2 vote means no action, right? That's what county council said at the supervisors meeting. So we're kind of in this middle ground at the moment. Sable came out with a statement pretty quickly that said, "We're so glad that the no action upholds the planning commission's decision to approve the transfer of permits from Exxon to Sable." On the other hand, the Environmental Defense Center and the Center for Biological Diversity issued statements at the same time saying, "We are so glad that the 2-2 vote results in a non-action and the Planning Commission's decision is not upheld." Um, so
Oh,
do with
because
that
they
what you
had
will.
so in other words, they appealed the planning commission decision.
Correct. So
Okay.
back in October, the Planning Commission voted 3-1 to approve transferring ownership, operator, and guarantor permits from former owner ExxonMobil to Sable. The EDC and the CBD appealed up to the Board of Supervisors. And that was kind of what this meeting was for. But at the end of the day, both sides declared a quasi
Victory.
victory on that. So we're kind of still in limbo, waiting on, hypothetically a final verdict on that.
Where would such a verdict come from, right? I mean,
Likely from the county. County council's
county
kind of been
council.
looking into this exactly, this issue of 25B, which is, to your point, the very narrow ordinance that the supervisors were basing their votes on, that was created, for this exact purpose, to make sure that smaller oil companies without the financial resources, to handle a spill couldn't kind of just waltz their way into a county and start up an oil operation.
So do we know that's forthcoming, or we think that maybe someday they might, or where does that stand exactly?
They still have lots of steps to go through, lots of approvals from state agencies, but they're definitely chipping away at the block. I mean, they got these really important state waivers in December from the fire marshal. That was a huge step forward for them. This vote, if it was a victory for Sable, is a huge step for them. It's kind of unclear at this point whether or not they would be able to operate or restart without those permits, or if they could maybe work out a deal with Exxon to piggyback on their permits. That aspect is still pretty up in the air, but I mean, things are pretty time tied right now as well. They have until January 1st, 2026 before Exxon has the ability to reacquire all of the assets if they choose to.
Can I ask a question, Margo?
Yeah.
So like boil it down, like what's happening now and what would happen if they got their permits? Would we see new oil construction out of the ocean if they get the permits and that's not happening now? What is the big environmental fight over?
Yeah. So my understanding at the moment is that, construction wise, not much would change, right? They've already been doing the construction on the coast. They've already been repairing the anomalies.
They've
So
already been getting stop work orders
they've
every.
already been getting stop work orders, right? So on that basis, nothing would have switched like that from Tuesday to Wednesday. We wouldn't have seen that. However, the environmental fight really revolves around restarting oil, right? There's no environmental impact on transferring, a name on a piece of paper, right? But really the fight is over restarting the oil platforms and the pipeline that spilled in 2015 and caused, some pretty gnarly wildlife devastation.
So
Uh,
turning the spigot back on from platform Holly, is it?
Hondo Harmony Heritage,
I was going to say that.
I think.
Are the pro like turning it on people saying, well, if we don't do that, the oil has to come from elsewhere, somewhere, and it's better that it is local than transporting it in? Is that their argument?
That's part of the argument, yeah. And I mean, California generally we use a ton of oil and we export almost all of it. Or sorry, import almost all of it. So, we're consuming oil at a rate that we can't keep up with ourselves. You even have Governor Newsom kind of coming in and talking about maybe wanting to start up, a refinery owned and operated by the state to kind of help deal with some of that. And so that's definitely the argument. Sable also has said that, restarting these platforms and the pipeline would help, it would be less carbon emissions than it would be kind of from anywhere else. Um, so there's that aspect as well. Maybe this oil is cleaner. I'm not a scientist. I can't check that. Working on it, but it's, so those are the arguments for sure.
All right. So more work for lawyers, and uh, we can we have to sort of wait and see what happens with these other agencies. Although it seems like it's kind of kabuki at this point. They're all going to get the go ahead. So it's seems to me like it's the Coastal Commission is the big player that's left in terms of the environmental hope.
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit of the Coastal Commission, but it's also going to be a lot of state parks right now. The pipeline goes through state parks property, Gaviota State Park, and they've been giving away, currently Sable's easement has expired. An easement expired in 2016 for that pipeline to go through the Gaviota State Park. It's about a 4 mile stretch. And State Parks has been kind of, on a case by case basis, giving companies the ability to go in and repair things. And now they're kind of calling it in and saying you need a new easement. So that's definitely under works right now as well.
Oh,
State Parks is actually kind of stepping up as a bigger player here than we had initially thought. And a lot of these agencies will be in Santa Barbara or spokespeople for them on Thursday to talk through some of this at an informational town hall.
that would be Thursday next.
Yes, Thursday the
Uh,
13th.
Thursday the 13th. And where's that, Margaux?
It'll be a direct relief at 4 p.m.
Oh, okay. Good to know.
Mhm.
All right. Well, we'll have to talk about this more after that happens. And the state parks thing is fascinating. I had not heard that. I must have missed a memo or something. All right. Ryan P. Cruz. We were waiting for this renoviction thing to happen. The second that Wendy Santa Maria replaced Alejandro Gutierrez on the city council, and it in fact did. They had kind of a knockdown about whether the timing was right. What's the substance of the ordinance that they're talking about, and why were they fighting about the timing?
So there's three main points of these provisions that were brought up and proposed originally about a year ago, last January, and specifically it would give people the right to return after a renovation with a cap on the rent at 10%. And that kind of would be a big change in that, renovation field. Right now, you can tell someone to vacate their unit for 30 days. And after that, it's a new lease, and that will be market rate. Basically, you can double, triple as much as you want to. You can raise the rent. So that would be added in. And then another provision to ensure that they have a third-party contractor or third-party say that why this family has to leave their house for 30 days. And that's going to get a lot of pushback from the landlords. That's another cost on them. And then when you're putting a cap on what they can raise the rent, that's going to be a big difference. And then the third part is something Mike Jordan actually proposed first, and it's called a cooling off period. And it would be if you buy an apartment that's 5 or more units, then for 1 year you can't demolish or renovate that property, and that would, give people time to, once they realize somebody bought their property, give them time to, a year or so to figure out what the next step is. Now, those were already proposed, but that was last year. That was a different council. And what it's really highlighting is, yeah, like you said, Wendy Santa Maria is on the council now, and council's in a slight majority, 4-3, in favor of these same protections that were across the council last year, and they fell through. So it really is highlighting that. But right now, the pushback is it too soon? Do we need more data? And so there's going to be a little bit of
Well, isn't it? I mean, Mike Jordan and Randy Rouse seem to make that argument. I mean, isn't the question, do we need any data? Is there any
what
data?
the question is what data? So they asked maybe for Goleta has a similar ordinance that they just put in place, and that Jordan asked if can we get the data on that? But it would be really too soon. It'd be a couple months worth of data. I think that might be more of a way to stall this a little bit more, because this is already going to be stalled. It's not going to be voted on next week. So Tuesday on the 11th, they're going to talk about it. And after that, they would see what the next step is. And there's a 2-week break after that from council. So, it wouldn't be voted on until April.
What is the data they want?
They want to know how it would work out here, how it would impact, how many units it would impact, and things like that, and how many renovictions are happening. And there's somebody that commented at City Council that there's only 3 renovictions that have happened. And there's a difference between how many people are willing to say in the media on the record, I'm being renovicted, and how many people are actually being renovicted. There's a lot more that we hear about that people are afraid to tell their stories. People are afraid to have their names out there and stand up against the landlord. That's why these other ones that are where the people are standing up, that's something they're going to get retaliation. They're risking retaliation, and it's really hard to find a lot of people that are willing to say what's happening. But people are going.
So Mike's argument is basically, is this a solution in search of a problem?
I think also, a lot of landlords are pushing back on that third party thing. If what Randy Rouse is also saying is, are we demonizing one side more than the other? And, that's an argument that they're going to hash out. And there's going to be a lot of landlords that are going to come up next week. But the difference is between last year, when a lot of landlords and a lot of tenants showed up on that January 9th meeting, is the makeup of the council is different.
Right.
So,
right. And speaking of the makeup of the council, Josh, I know Wendy Santa Maria has replaced Megan Harmon as your hero on the city council, but
I got to stop you there, Jerry.
Let me just I'll give you due time to respond. Well, let me just read a comment that she made, and I want to ask your reaction to it. She says, "We are in an emergency. This is about as urgent as wildfire." I have 2 questions, Josh, and I know you agree with me. A, is there any emergency other than the fact that she's now on council and Alejandra's not? And B, really? This is as urgent as wildfire? I've been evicted and I've fled wildfire. And let me tell you something, it's not the same thing. I would suggest that you suggest to her she retire that metaphor. This concludes my prepared remarks, Josh. What do you think?
Okay, a couple of things is there is a question about how many renovictions have happened, and it shows the power of the media, because there are people who believe that the only renovictions that have happened are the ones that Ryan has written about, the ones I have written about, 215 Bass Street, core spaces. Like there are people who think those are the only ones because those are the ones that have gotten the most media attention. The fact of the matter is that they have been happening for years all over Santa Barbara, Goleta. Sometimes, it's hard for journalists to know about all of them. That's why the 215 Bath Street people, as Ryan was alluding to, have been so important to all of this, because they have chosen to seek out media attention and tell their stories. On Haley Street, right, they went in there and knocked down all of these very affordable apartments, and they renovicted them, right? And they're going to rebuild those. So they have happened little by little, incrementally over the years. And you can't just point to 215 Bath Street as the only, and core spaces. Those are the most egregious that we know about. So part of the conversation is how do we acquire some sort of database about, well, how many have happened, right? And so that's part of the issue, because there have been many more, but journalists can't cover everything, and so we only cover the ones that are the big ones. The other part of it is, obviously, if you're to take it literally, Jerry, it is not a wildfire. Okay, but her point is metaphorical, right? Her point is if you are a family and you have kids and you have to move out and maybe you have concern, culturally, Mexican Americans do not like to complain. They do not want attention on them. And so they love the country and they love they respect the government. And so if they're evicted, they're not likely to go raise a stink. They're going to be desperate and they're going to be afraid and scared. And so it's not a wildfire in the sense of that you're having to
Oh,
flee
it's
your
not a
home.
wildfire. That's why she shouldn't say it's a
But
wildfire.
it is, but those emotions of holy crap, we have to move tomorrow and we have to figure out school for our kids and we have to figure out a place to live and we may have to live in our car or we're going to have to live with some other family and hopefully they'll put up with us for a little while. That emotion, yes, it is not raging inferno of flames, but it is a raging inferno of desperate, scary emotions of being on the street or not. And so that is her sort of point. Now, that quote did get a lot of people upset, but it's by design. And this is why we need that
By
diversity.
design,
Yes, it is to
you
get people
spoke
to
with her
think
as
of.
her media advisor and worked on this one, did you?
No, I did not, but it is by design to get people to think about these things as urgent. The big problem in our world, as you know, Jerry, and you've, been holding Trump accountable for all of this, is that some people only see the world in the lens and context of how it affects them. And it's really hard for people to understand or have empathy for people who are poor and can't afford a $5 increase in something and much less a big rent. So that is her point. Now, what's going to
Let me
happen?
just make a suggestion.
Yeah.
About as urgent as an earthquake. Okay? That's all. Just lay off the wildfire. That's all I'm saying. It's a very touchy subject.
I will say
Some of
though,
us who have lost our fire insurance. And by the way, Margaux, let's talk about that. Josh, I got to come back to you on something else. But
yeah,
Margaux, you covered this hearing convened by Senator Limon and Assemblymember Hart about the state of fire insurance or the unavailability of fire insurance that had Ricardo Lara, the insurance commissioner here. What was that all about?
Yeah, well, I mean, to your point, it's a very hot topic at the moment. I mean, insurers have been pulling out of California for the past year. We just watched LA go through something horrible. People are still working on getting their insurance payouts down there. That's not an overnight process. And as a result, a couple hours up the coast, Santa
Santa
Barbarans
Barbarian.
are losing their insurance because insurance companies are looking at the risks of insuring people in wildfire prone areas and they're saying, I don't want any part of that. And so, the town hall in Goleta was, very important. And it had a lot of people there that were on the FAIR plan, which is, the insurer of last resort in California. If you can't get insurance on the private market, you go to the FAIR plan because everyone, has a right to have home insurance. But people are really concerned, about are they going to have to stay on the FAIR plan forever? The FAIR plan can only do so much, and
How many people showed up?
about 100. It was it was pretty full in there. People were standing in the back. Seats were full.
And did they get any answers?
Some, at the end of the day, it's hard to say, your premiums won't go up. And that's not what was, you can't say that. And that's not what, Commissioner Lara was saying. He said, prices might have to go up to coincide with the risk of living where you live. And that's kind of the risk that you have to accept. But at the end of the day, he and the state of California are kind of pushing for a lot more protections for insurance consumers. And I think that was kind of an important thing to highlight. They're looking at expanding, 1-year moratoriums, making it so that defensible spaces around your home might be able to give you a discount on insurance. Making sure insurance companies are staying in the state and still insuring people. Those are all things that they're pushing for in the legislature.
Yeah. And did he discuss at all moving people off of the FAIR plan back into private insurance?
A little bit. He touched on it. The chief of staff to the president of the FAIR Plan was on a panel at the same meeting. So he touched a lot more on the ways that they're kind of trying to do that. And his whole point was, we don't want you on the FAIR Plan. Our goal is not growth. Our goal is to be here when you need us and get you back into the private market. And I think that's a fair point. He's there to help, but at the same time, you need wraparound insurance even when you're on the FAIR Plan. So just kind of making that
It's an
transition.
unsustainable business plan because they finance it by charging the insurance companies to keep doing it. And the more insurance companies that leave California, there's less there's going to be. All right. Well, good on Monique and Greg for putting that together. All right, Josh, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but you paused for breath, so I took advantage of the opportunity.
I'm sure the audience was like, "Thank you, Jerry."
But speaking of issues of concern to old guys, the e-bikes regulation crackdown, I guess if you could call that, sort of came to City Hall this week. What is anything going to change, and how's it going to be enforced?
Well, they're trying to figure out a way to make it safer for everybody on State Street. So they're looking at amendments to this ordinance. And so part of it is to say, hey, you can't ride your bike on the sidewalk. And that's one thing that people are sort of upset about because there are, if you're a biker, it's not totally simple and easy to traverse across town and be able to do it safely. And so part of the thing that has come up is that, they're talking about bikes all over, e-bikes, not just on State Street, is, sometimes in the morning there's no one there. It's easier to go under the Carrillo Street underpass onto the sidewalk. And there's no one walking there anyway. And now they're talking about having, citations for something like that. So they're trying to figure out a way to crack down and make it safer for people on State Street and throughout the city. It's a very, it's an issue we're seeing. Like we talked about the rent evictions. It's the same sort of thing. Like it's like there's three of them who don't want some of these things, and then there's the other four which tend to be more progressive. Everyone agrees that the e-bikes on State Street are
Another argument against
problem.
district elections. Go ahead.
What's that?
I said another argument against district elections. Go ahead.
Everyone agrees that e-bikes are a problem because they go very fast and they are unsafe. But the answers on how to deal with that, vary. And so it's a thing that
Are people required to wear a helmet to ride?
no.
When you're under 18, you're required to wear a helmet. And then one of the big things that came out of this is that those Sur-Ron bikes, the ones that look like electric dirt bikes, and the ones that, go up to 50, 60 miles an hour, those are illegal throughout the city. Those are not street legal. So when you see kids riding those on State Street or anywhere, those are not legal.
They're like technically motorcycles?
They're supposed to be off-road. You go ride them on an off-road track or up in the mountains or on a private property. Those are what they're meant for, like just like a dirt bike without all the street legal lights and everything. Those are completely illegal in the city. And that's what we're seeing a big problem with. Everybody saw John Palmentary post about this, and there was a big argument about, whether these bikes should be allowed. And they're just, the fact of the matter is those are not allowed in the city. So those don't have to be included in the ordinance but the thing is enforcement and getting the cops to.
Yeah, what do you think about enforcement, Ryan? Did you hear any answers that sounded
I think
believable?
So Mike Jordan had some good comments about, it was very iffy. The language was gray. I understand why the language had to be gray because you can't say when pedestrians are within 10 feet or within 25 feet of a bicyclist, because when you start saying that, like you're going to have to go out there and have a measurement. Somebody has to have a video and know exactly how far it was. It's a lot harder to litigate that. Giving the police the discretion to say when it's close by a pedestrian or in close proximity, I think their language was, it gives them the wiggle room to say, if it's an early morning, an e-bike is doing some wheelies, nobody's going to care. But if it's a Saturday farmers market and it's really busy, the police can stop them and give them a citation then. Now, how it's going to work out, that's going to be a big question.
Wait, was the chief there? What did the chief
The
say?
chief was there. The chief, she mentioned that their presence on State Street, because they don't have, cruisers on State Street. And as soon as she mentioned that, the city administrator cut it off and says, we're only talking about bikes specifically today. We're not talking about reopening State Street. But, I think some people pointed out that according to the emergency ordinance right now, they can have cruisers on State Street. So why not have cruisers, every hour, twice an hour, go up and down one of the streets?
What if they had officers on e-bikes?
Yeah. But who's paying
for
for
those
that?
off-road deals? Let them run them down with that one.
Right.
So, Josh, is this on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being, the usual city hall blather, and 10 being, boy, this problem's going to be solved? Where do you place the enforcement mechanism on this?
Well, it's incremental. Law enforcement is, going to try to use their judgment to pay attention. If there's some big accident, I think a lot of people are pointing to data, like where's the data that says that there's bikes crashing into pedestrians? That might create a scenario, if that were to happen, where there is more of a enforcement tool. I think the bigger issue is, I'm sitting in the council chamber watching these issues. I'm just thinking Randy Rouse should really be thinking about his reelection, because I know he's got a really strong base of people in town who support him. But enough of these things are happening where he's offending pockets of people that are going to turn out and vote. And whether it's the right to return renters, it's the e-bike people, it's the State Street people, I'm just like flabbergasted
Who's
at
going to
how.
beat him?
I don't know, but I do know that when you're looking forward and being strategic, you can't assume you're unbeatable. And if you're offending different parts of the community, you're just going to make enough people mad enough that they are going to get somebody to challenge him. And that's what's interesting to me, to see him and Jordan, Eric a little bit, not as much so, just like on the minority side of public opinion on many of these issues. And I just think politically, he's got to be careful that they don't run somebody against him. Alejandra didn't think that, she could be beat, as the local grew up on the east side, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, she learned the hard way that that doesn't work if you're not in touch with constituents. So I think that there's some.
I think these are closely. I think these are not 80-20 issues. I think these are like 52-48 issues. I don't.
No, I mean, I agree. It's not like the whole community against, but I just think that Randy needs to be politically aware that a lot of people are increasingly becoming uncomfortable with him, when they may have sat out voting last time and they may vote this time.
Okay, let me just read you a headline from the SF Gate. Speed can kill. E-bikes overrun a wealthy California city's popular urban corridor. What popular central
urban corridor
California city do you suppose that is? That's the kind of fine publicity we here, who depend on the hospitality industry, are getting around the state. So good on Randy on this one. I'm sorry. All right, real quick, we got to get out of here, but Ryan, we've been checking in with you on what's going on with immigration since Trump got in. One of your colleagues had a piece about a couple hundred San Marcos High students doing a rally yesterday. Where are we? What's at baseline? Have there been more? I know there was the one a raid on the west side that you wrote about. Have there been others?
There was actually 2 arrests that same day. Where the FBI was helping serve a warrant at a house, and they broke in the front door. That same morning they picked up another man who was on the way to take his kid to a soccer game. And before he got to the car, they kind of picked him up and detained him before he was even able to identify himself. And so we're still seeing it. What we're seeing with immigration, we're kind of seeing two realities. We're seeing what Trump is saying nationwide and the rhetoric around it, and then the reality on the ground here. And we're seeing it start to slow down the activity, but we're seeing consistent arrests and ICE. ICE was in town, a couple of days ago, March 4th. They were in town, and in Santa Maria, they arrested two farm workers. So, and these farm workers did not have any criminal record at all. And that's kind of what we're hearing, is that we're seeing arrests of people that are either being detained and they're U.S. citizens, or being taken in and they had no criminal arrest, or they had a misdemeanor violation. And that's what a lot of the advocates are kind of pointing out right now, is that there's a rhetoric surrounding that all people that have crossed over are illegal aliens, and they're using this language, and they're saying that everybody has committed a crime as if you've crossed the border. And that's, a change in the way that we've traditionally treated this in America. My grandparents came over here with my mom when she was a baby. And, you had time. My grandpa became a citizen 15, 20 years afterwards. And he was so proud to be an American and do that process. But it took him a couple decades. And that used to be the norm. People would come across, they would have kids here. Their kids would be, no question, a citizen. But now we're seeing a lot more fear in general, and just uncertainty, because federal government and ICE isn't releasing local numbers, which is really discouraging. They release on their Twitter their weekly totals or daily totals, and they don't tell us when we ask as journalists. In Santa Barbara County, we are trying to check how many arrests there are today, and they say because of so many things happening, we cannot provide day-to-day operations information, and we're really relying on these on-the-ground organizations, 805 and DocuFund with its rapid response line, and La Casa de la Raza, which has really stepped up right now. They're having 1,000 families.
Yeah, you had that piece on the meeting that Laura convened.
Yeah, so we're here in Santa Barbara. We have a lot of organizations, and the sheriff's office isn't helping with these type of enforcement. So people in Santa Barbara County are relatively safe for now, but it's the push of loosening up, letting ICE come onto schools and churches, and them just showing up in unmarked vehicles with masks. It creates this sense in the community that they're just these cowboys coming to get anybody, and that really heightens this sense of fear.
All right. Well, thanks for that. And I'm not a big fan of high school students running amok on the streets, but good on them at San
Yeah,
Marcos.
that and just in general, I've seen a lot more civic engagement here in we have a protest tomorrow, or a women's march on Saturday. We had the transgender march last weekend, and there's been Elon Musk protest every weekend, and will be continuing for however long this takes.
Yeah. And I think it's going to be necessary, because anybody who watched the Democratic Party perform at the Trump speech the other night could only put their head in their hands. And I think if there is to be any opposition, it's going to have to come from civil society, which is where it's coming from. And before anybody sends me angry emails, this is not a right-left issue or a Democratic-Republican issue. This is a pro-democracy versus authoritarianism issue. And that, don't even kid yourself that that's what's going on. And anybody who doubts it, there's an interesting piece in the New York Times this morning interviewing Chinese people, Chinese American people who are here in the United States, and what they're seeing and what they're witnessing, and how it looks like what they saw in China. So, all right. Last thing, I promise. Hot Springs Trail, Josh. You caught the tour bus going up there. Hap wants to know, how does the tour bus turn around? A. B. Does it take people to lunch afterwards, or is it only dropping them at Hot Springs Trail?
Well, my Riven Rock Road resident spies didn't tell me where the tour bus turned around, so I don't know. But essentially, there's tour buses now that are dropping people off at the Hot Springs Trail. And this is a major concern, because we know that the trail's popularity has exploded. and there are wildfire concerns, not to bring up wildfires again, but people have wildfire concerns, and
Actual wildfires, not metaphorical wildfires.
and these hot springs have become somewhat of a tourist attraction because there are these human-made bathing pools that you can go up there and sit in there, and people like to do it. So it's getting all of these tourists to come. There's 8 county parking spaces, and then people who come just kind of park wherever they want. The neighbors, there's been litigation. They put boulders to block people. They had to remove them. It's a mess. It's the most popular trail. And so basically, the county, Roy Lee, one of his first actions here is to get sheriff's office money to pay for increased enforcement on red flag warning days. And so they're concerned, like, hey, if there's gonna be a lot of people up there when it's windy and hot and the conditions for a major fire, we need to close this thing or stop parking or have law enforcement and figure out a way. Because as we know, I mean, obviously everyone is aware of what happened in Los Angeles, but we are very aware here of these fires, and there's not a lot of, I mean, authorities have escape routes and evacuation routes, and they're doing their best, but there's a lot of fear about what could happen with a fire that was out of control in the Santa Barbara foothills.
All right. All right. Very good. Let's leave it there. Margaux, what are you working on? What are you going to have for next time?
Well, next week, big Sable meeting, subtle plug.
Is there?
Yep, big Sable meeting Thursday, town
Oh
hall.
yeah, Thursday.
Yeah, that'll be super important, and we'll hopefully give everyone a little more information about what's going on.
All right, we'll get you
all
back
better.
in. We'll get you back and talk about that some more. Ryan, what are you up to?
Usual City Hall stuff, and then a nice shout out to the kids over at DP News. They know they were well awarded again this year at this annual conference they go to. So I'm going to be writing about that, and then and later in March I'm going to be writing about the Western Flyer, the Steinbeck boat that he wrote about in Sia Cortez is going to be stopping by in Santa Barbara. So I'm going to hope to hop on that boat and see what.
That sounds like fun. Josh, who you got on the podcast?
Well, I interviewed Sullivan Israel. You'll love this. He is the co-founder of Strongtown Santa Barbara, and he wants to make it easier, safer for everyone to ride bikes. But as he says, Jerry, and I'm not like a big bike
Maybe he
guy.
should run for mayor. Let's see how he does against.
He is running for mayor. He says that on the show. But his whole thing is, if you get more people riding bikes than people who drive cars, there's less traffic. So, we're all on the same page.
Gosh, Nick is already starting work on the endorsement for this guy.
Nick loves Sullivan Israel, by the way. So you're right on there.
All right. All right. Margaux Lovely, Ryan Cruz, and Josh Molina, thank you for coming.
What the hell are you saying?
I said you're already working on the endorsement of Izzy. He's running for mayor. He's running against Randy.
Oh, Sullivan Israel, yeah. All powers. You know what? We need Sullivan Israel.
Oh,
see, I told you.
All right, I'm out. Cut this part out. Cut this part out. Okay.
Hey.
Thanks, everyone, for watching. See you next time on Newsmakers.